the esteemed guests of the Vision Center for Political Development and the academic program for Arab and Muslim Diaspora Studies at the State University of San Francisco. Welcome to all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I am profoundly grateful for our dedicated student colleagues here today. They devote significant time and effort, demonstrating extraordinary willingness to make sacrifices. Their activism extends beyond protesting genocide. They boldly oppose and struggle against the Zionist movement, which they view as a criminal enterprise. This movement is a severe threat not only to the existence of Palestinians, but also to Jewish communities. It exploits their identity to support colonial agenda. This leads to widespread suffering, diminishes resources, and marginalizes them from the narrative of civilization. It portrays them as enemies of civilization and as terrorists when they assert their rights. Our symposium today aims to spotlight these student leaders' pivotal experience in the United States. We seek to engage directly and gain a deep understanding. We'll explore the context, motivation, methods of activism, challenges, and the future prospects. These are envisioned by those actively involved in campus-based resistance. We are joined by representatives from Columbia University, Nania Renteria, Harvard University, Ricky Sanchez, University of California, UC Santa Cruz, Max Sarosi, Ohio University, Janine Musa, Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts, Neki Thomas. Then we will have an analysis by Professor Rabab Abdul Hadi. She is founding and director and senior scholar of AMID. She will frame the discourse surrounding the student movement. Each speaker will have 10 minutes of their presentation. This will be followed by a question and answer session. Let's begin with Nania Renteria from Columbia University. Nania, please have 10 minutes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Tu'itaiwai, buenos días. My name is Nania Renteria. I'm a PhD student, or recently PhD candidate here at Columbia University. I'm also a member of UAW 2710, our local graduate student workers union. I'm an alum of San Francisco State and a participant in Dr. Rabab's Teaching Palestine endeavors. So I'm really honored to be here. Thank you all so much for your contributions and for putting this together. I'm just going to talk very briefly about what's been happening here on my campus in occupied Lenape territory or New York City. So, you know, this campus has a long history of political activism in New York City. Most memorable in our kind of collective memory is the 1968 student protest movement, where students occupied multiple buildings on campus in protest of a sort of segregated gym expansion and against the Vietnam War. Then in 1985, they also, engaged in a lot of nonviolent protests, civil disobedience on our campus related to apartheid South Africa. And most recently in the early 90s, students here also engaged in, activism, protests, sit-ins, and so on against the fossil fuel industry, calling for the university to divest. And in each of those cases, folks were very successful. The university today uses these flashpoints in our history to market itself as a space of radical and progressive politics. But what we've seen in the past month or so here at Columbia really lays bare the true purpose of this university, which is to say that it is a neoliberal institution that functions more as a hedge fund that happens to issue degrees than it does any kind of educational institution that promotes free speech or free inquiry. The irony being that students do have to read about decolonial movements, they have to read Fanon and so on for the core, the classes that they take in their first couple of years. But when students actually put those politics into praxis, they are penalized brutally. So I'll just, give you a little bit of backdrop of the past academic year. And I'm happy to answer any other questions that arise from this. So, there's long been a robust student and faculty and graduate students organizing on this campus around Palestine. It was one of the things that actually drew me here, the existence of the Center for Palestine Studies as one example, and a number of very well-known scholars here. And so for years, actually, prior to this most recent iteration of the encampments, students at this school have been advocating through the sort of like approved university channels to get the university to divest from Israeli occupation. One of their calls, and this remains the same today, is the demand for Columbia to disclose its investments. As of this moment, only 0.66% of their investments are publicly available information. I believe this has to do with the fact that they are a private institution, but I'm not entirely certain about the mechanism of that. But the point is, people have been working on this campus for years using approved institutional channels to call for divestment. In the wake of October 7th, Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace and a number of other student organizations, engaged in a series of, relatively small, relatively tame protest actions on our sort of main quad. They held vigils, they held die-ins, they had speakers and so on. And in November, both of those groups that were the main organizers were suspended without really explanation by the administration. What they did, which I think is just a brilliant example of the creativity of our undergraduate organizers, was to pull together a coalition of more than 100 other student groups who were in favor of divestment. And so they reconstituted themselves as QUAD, or CUAD, Columbia University Apartheid Divest. My union, the Graduate Workers Union, is a member of QUAD. And so, we've been supporting in all the ways that we are able to as graduate student workers. After the suspension, there was a series of congressional hearings in which our university president was put on the stand more or less to respond to allegations of anti-Semitism from conservative Republican representatives. During that time, she essentially sold out the entire mission of the university as a site of study, curiosity, or free inquiry, agreeing that she would immediately fire and or suspend any and all faculty, students, and postdocs who were vocally pro-Palestinian. She equated that with, anti-Semitism and so on. You all are probably rather familiar with that argument at this point. And so some people from the student coalition decided that it was time to escalate because the university had implemented a series of rules. There's like a code of conduct related to protests that they put out around this time that basically made it against the rules for any protest to occur at all on campus, that except for within approved hours, they had to be permitted in advance by the admin and not have amplified sound and so on. So, the whole purpose of the protest being to kind of disrupt the daily functioning of the university was at odds with these rules. So folks decided to put up an encampment. And as folks probably know, there was one encampment on April 17th that lasted for roughly 2 days, which was broken up by the NYPD, who were invited to our campus by our president because we're because we're a private institution. The police have to be authorized to come into campus by leadership. I was told that she met with the academic senate because our policies indicate that if someone is going to invite the police onto campus, there has to be a unanimous vote by the academic senate, so it's not a unilateral decision. Academic senate said absolutely not. Our president, Manoush Shafiq, overrode their recommendation, and roughly 100 or so of our students, many of my students, were arrested in that experience. It also radicalized many more. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of people watching on the lawn when this happened, because there were many hundreds of riot police with helmets and the whole gear present. And so students sort of organically, who had not been in the original camp, jumped the fence to the adjacent lawn and set up the new encampment, which lasted roughly a week and a half. I'm not certain of the dates. Eventually, with further escalation and constant threats of eviction, constant threats of violence, sort of willy-nilly expulsions that didn't, evictions from student housing and so on. Some of those students decided to escalate, and they did so by taking over Hamilton Hall, which is the main administration building here on campus. They renamed it Hind's Hall for the 6-year-old little girl who was murdered with her family in Gaza. And that essentially freaked out the admin so much that they called in the NYPD with something, I don't know the exact number, but millions of dollars in overtime were paid to NYPD for this span of like 24 hours, during which they blocked off our entire neighborhood for about 10 blocks in each direction. People could not leave their homes. They could not return home if they had been out. And it broke into the building through an upper window, firing a stray bullet, we recently found out, used flashbang grenades, pushed people downstairs, and many students were injured, many students were arrested from that. All of this in an attempt to squash what is an uncontainable movement. And so now, we've had certain commencement disruptions in the past few days. They will be continuing. I think everyone is kind of trying to regroup a bit and to think about what will happen in the fall. But we are not giving up our demands for divestment. We see that this movement has ignited a fire across the country and across the world. We are thrilled, and we welcome the solidarity and the humanity, right? Our purpose is to always turn eyes back to Gaza, right? Just the horrors that are happening there. We on this campus do not want really fame or notoriety, as far as I can tell, as far as me and my comrades. We want the killing to stop. We want the occupation to end, period, full stop. And we see our university as one arm of a multi-pronged wheel that is facilitating and enabling not only a genocide, but prior to October 7th, of course, a all-out occupation, military occupation. And so we want freedom. We want freedom for all people, and especially with Palestine. So yeah, I think that's about my time. I'll stop there, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you all.
Thank you, Nanya, so much. Ricky, it's your time.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Ricky. I am a PhD candidate studying diasporic theater and performance at Harvard in the English department. And I'm also currently the guide of HGSU UAW Local 5118. And so my context is a little bit different, and I just want to make that very clear. I am a Harvard graduate student, but I'm currently living in Chicago in the unceded territory of the Kickapoo, Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux people. And so I have been supporting the encampment at Harvard, and I helped build and support the encampment from Harvard at Harvard from afar, and then transitioned eventually to being on the ground and supporting the UChicago encampment, where my partner is a student, and where I fulfilled very different roles. So I'll start just with my experience with the Harvard encampment. So, I mean, very similar to what Nanea just sort of explained, there's a pretty long history of activism at Harvard, though I think Harvard generally is less keen to celebrate the legacy of activism on its campus, though certainly likes to sort of suggest that they are leaders in diversity, inclusion, equity, these sorts of things. But the history of Harvard, at least with regard to students in support of Palestine, is quite long. There have long been students of Palestinian descent, and also Jewish students who felt very strongly about the Zionist state that were against it. And so the Palestine Solidarity Committee, for as long as I've been at Harvard, has been active, has sort of regularly held Kufia Thursdays, tried to raise visibility, held events that were really based on Palestinian culture and joy. Over the course of the past academic year, and similar to in 2021, there was a lot more active protests being held. Those, I think, began on somewhat of a weekly basis, and then kind of escalated over the course of the year as the genocide has gone on. Yeah, I think something that the student activists on the ground have had to face is the reality that disruption within the bounds that the university felt comfortable with was not disruptive enough. And I think it took various groups that were from different sort of spaces on campus, different amounts of time to come to that decision. So I think what really triggered Harvard students in general to do something like an encampment was truly just seeing Columbia students do it. And realizing that there was no point at which we were going to be able to disrupt in a way that was respectful and disrupt enough to make change happen. And so I think that one of the most important things that has come out of this to me, and I think increasingly, like as I have more and more conversations with folks, is realizing how vast our community network is, and how much we have to continue to invest in building the communities. Because what I think was really important was that putting together an encampment is not so easy when a university is really determined to silence you. And being able to speak to comrades that were, on the other side of the city or the other side of the country, or eventually in completely different parts of the world, was so instrumental to allowing us to shift and adjust the way that the encampment was existing so that it could continue to be, or could begin to be completely frank, as safe a place as possible, recognizing that there are ways to build safety within smaller communities, even when you are sort of immediately unsafe because you are a threat to the university, especially to the university making more money, and a threat to settler colonial violence. So I think that's sort of what allowed Harvard students to get there. And eventually we ended up, since October, I would say, there had been this like soft coalition of people sort of building together to try to to try to figure out whose tactics, because union tactics historically are quite different than certain student groups' tactics, and figure out whose tactics were most suitable, and understand what was needed most in different places. And I think that really, once the Columbia encampment was launched, there was a little bit more coalescing around like, okay, what do we actually really need to do here? The goals and objectives as far, as the Harvard encampment were disclose and divest. And I'm not sure how many of you have heard, but since this morning, the Harvard sort of encampment is now decamping. I think that where I think that where the current encampment or the campers currently stand is also just sort of looking to fall, trying to understand, regroup, and figure out where new pressure points lie, because what we've also learned is institutions are learning to be more and more agile in responding to these things. I don't think they'll ever be as agile as the students, let me be extremely clear. But they also trade secrets and communicate with one another. And that's something that we've known for a long time, especially from the union standpoint. We know that when we're writing our contracts that the universities are talking to one another. And so I think there's a general sense that we haven't completely, or we haven't at all achieved what we set out to achieve when we first started camp. And I think the general feeling is that, like the Palestinian people, the students are prepared to remain steadfast in their goals, and continue to do what has to be done. I'll take just the last minute or two that I have to talk a little bit more about what I experienced at UChicago and where I think the future successes lie. And that is that at UChicago, the goals were disclose, divest, repair. And UChicago saw police brutality that ended their encampment what feels like years ago, but I think was actually just a little bit more than a week ago. And that, I think what's really important there is repair, because the repair was not only about repairing the harms that the university had caused by investing in Israeli-backed money, and so helping rebuild universities in Gaza, but also about restoring and repairing the harms that the university had done here in Chicago, in the south side of Chicago, which are numerous, which include many of the same things, police violence, robbing people of their land and their homes, things like this, and really continuing to do that education work and helping people see how similar the struggles are between here, which feels like a different world at times, right? And Palestine.
Thank you so much, Ricky. Let's go with Max Sarosi. Max, you came from the encampment.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, sorry, I had to move because it's very misty here, very classic of Santa Cruz. I am Max Sarosi. I am in third year undergrad, majoring in critical race and ethnic studies as well as agroecology. I primarily organize with a group called Jews Against White Supremacy, UCSC, as well as UCSC Divest and Students for Justice in Palestine. I'm currently on the unceded territory of the Waswas speaking UP tribe. And yeah, I'm currently at the UC Santa Cruz Solidarity encampment for Gaza. We are on day 14 of our encampment. And so, yeah, I think just kind of to go into general things that have been happening on our campus. We have been organizing for, over 7 months now. Specifically around this current iteration of genocide in Gaza. And we have tried out a lot of tactics. You know, we have been rallying, we have been doing teach-ins, we have been, you know, occupying buildings, we have been doing, you know, road blockages, and it's gotten to the point where we felt like things needed to escalate, and Colombia led the way, and we followed. And so here we are on day 14 of our encampment. And so, yeah, our demands are very similar to many other universities. We are demanding full disclosure of all investments in weapons manufacturing, but also in the Israeli apartheid settler colonial state. We are demanding a complete academic boycott of all Israeli universities, and any sort of, you know, cutting of ties of any UC program with Israeli universities, such as study abroad. And then we're also demanding an end to academic repression, which I'll get into in a little bit because that has been very relevant on our campus. So, you know, protecting pro-Palestinian as well as Palestinian voices on campus, rejecting the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which conflates anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. And yeah, so we're also, you know, trying to, you know, in the case in which, you know, people involved in this encampment might be disciplined, we're, you know, demanding that that not be the case. We're asking that cops be removed off campus. We've recently seen a massive uptick in surveillance on campus. They've installed hundreds of new cameras, sound recording equipment. Police presence has definitely been notably higher. And so we're demanding an end to that. And then, of course, our last demand is ending the silence. And so this university in the past 7 months has released almost nothing about the genocide in Gaza. Of course, you know, it had a statement about October 7th, but has refused to acknowledge the fact that over 40,000 Palestinians have been slaughtered, quite literally family members of students at this university. And yeah, so those are our demands. I'll talk a little bit about what's been going on campus. So basically, yeah, obviously we have an administration that refuses to acknowledge the genocide. So that's kind of where we're beginning. But we've also had a lot of repression around teaching around Palestine, specifically in my department that I study in, the Critical Race and Ethnic Studies department, which has been very vocal about the genocide. And, you know, in my classes, this is something we talk about. And there's been like sustained attacks on the department for even posting something on their, you know, landing page on their website. You know, our vice chancellor released a statement saying that, you know, in response to Palestine being taught in the classroom, released a statement saying that it is, you know, against university policy to like politically indoctrinate in the classroom, which is quite a statement. And so, yeah, our Critical Race and Ethnic Studies department is certainly under attack for, you know, just teaching around Palestine. We've had, you know, Students for Justice in Palestine as an organization get condemned by the university several times for actions that, you know, simply were trying to raise awareness around the genocide and, you know, call out the university for its complicity in it. And so, yeah, that's kind of the environment. Obviously, there is a strike authorization vote happening started yesterday and is ending tomorrow with the UAW. So it is possible that all of our grad students and teaching assistants and readers are going to go on strike. And so that's going to be a big development in our campaign to get the UC to adhere to our demands, because the UAW has adopted a lot of the demands of our encampment and the encampments at the other UCs. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, we're on day 14 of our encampment, but our negotiations with the administration have already failed. They failed a few days ago. The university, I mean, yeah, the offers they gave us amounted to quite literally nothing. I mean, you should have seen the language of some of the documents that they put forth, but I mean, there was not one mention of the word Palestine. There was, a complete evasion of any of our demands, but rather offers to acknowledge violence in the Middle East or, things along those lines that, obviously met zero of our material demands. And so we profoundly rejected those and the negotiations failed. And so we're now at a point as an encampment where we are, deciding as to what's next. What is it going to take for us to pressure this administration to even consider our demands? And we stand in full solidarity with the UAW in their strike because we believe that, they are right to do so, but also that this will, provide immense leverage, the immense leverage that we might need to get this university to move on our demands. And yeah, I think the point that was brought up earlier about how the students won't be stopped is something that, if there's anything I've taken away from this, it's that. And yeah, the university administration is very clever in how they deal with students, and kind of, infiltrate our movements and kind of, try to make side deals and things like that. But ultimately, like, we're out here, we've been out here for 2 weeks now. And, despite not reaching any of our, concrete demands, which obviously are massive material, demands that, I don't think anyone was expecting would be achieved in 2 weeks. We have built something quite beautiful. I'm sitting in front of our People's University classroom, which we've had, 2 weeks of programming hosted here, teach-ins on everything from, Palestinian poetry to Know Your Rights workshops to jail support workshops to, teach-ins on kind of solidarity from the Philippines to Palestine. I mean, it's been kind of an incredible experiment in terms of the university we wish to see. We've been able to provide 3 meals a day for 2 weeks now, to not just the students encamped here, but students at this university, but also community members, some of which are in-housed. And so I think, despite not meeting any of our kind of material demands, we've been demonstrating what the university we wish to see looks like, which has been really beautiful and powerful to witness. Because yeah, I mean, this neoliberal university that we exist in, has all these investments in weapons manufacturing, US imperialism, and Israeli apartheid, and yet we have such crises of housing, lack of, adequate food resources, and just general kind of, income, disparities on this campus that this university refuses to address. And so, yeah, I think we have been, trying to kind of model a university that rather is invested in its students rather than, invested in these, machines that actually harm everyone. And so, yeah, I think that's one major takeaway I've taken away from this is that, while we are organizing for Palestine and these demands, we can also kind of demonstrate what we wish to see in the future. Yeah, how am I doing on time?
Okay, I'm sorry, I was on mute. Okay, Max, I think the time finished. Thank you so much. Let's go with Janine.
السلام عليكم اسمي جنين موسى أنا مع Students for Justice in Palestine في الجامعة ولاية أوهايو. وأنا من قطر رام الله. I'm going to speak in English for the rest of it because I'm more comfortable in English. But yeah, my introduction or my segment is going to be mostly context because I feel like I'm from, you know, a random public university that a lot of people don't know about. So, but yeah, we're the third largest university in America, and we're most well known for our sports. So when we're doing stuff like this, it's very, I would say, you know, important and monumental because it's such a like large state school, even though it is in a random conservative type of place. It really helps move the movement forward, I would say. And I know a lot of us spoke about like our universities with the Vietnam War as well as, you know, apartheid South Africa. I would say generally OSU kind of likes to speak on diversity as many of our universities do. But in practice, they don't really do much, and there's not really a culture around protesting or civil, you know, civil protesting, I would say. There's definitely student groups that have led it in the past, and we have occupied buildings. We have like a decent campus history of protesting, but it's just never really acknowledged by the university. But yeah, so to give some context, because that's mostly what this is going to be, for our first semester, we led protests, we organized demonstrations, we had vigils, die-ins. We basically exhausted, you know, every single sort of protest means. And we did like educational teach-ins, humanitarian efforts, just a lot of stuff. And then we went into the second semester and began our BDS campaign. And throughout that process, you know, we had a lot of student support, and it was really looking like it was in our favor. But once the initiative reached the ballot, our university actually pulled it mid-vote. So students weren't allowed to basically have their voices heard. So we never knew the outcome of it. Yeah, so, and there was no communication with us over that decision or anything like that. They just removed it. And something I want to say is I feel like our situation is very different than a lot of other schools, where we've met with our administration multiple times, and we've had meetings with our president and vice president, and we brought forth demands in those meetings, and we spoke on our experiences. But every single time they would basically ignore it. It was radio silence. Nothing came out of those meetings. And those meetings actually stopped, and all communication stopped once they removed our initiative off the ballot. So naturally, we were like, you know, we exhausted all administrative avenues. We're going to, you know, follow the footsteps of Columbia. So we launched our encampment on April 25th. And we actually held an encampment 3 times in total. Our first time was April 25th at 4 a.m. The moment we arrived on the ground, there were 6 cop cars that surrounded us, and we were around like 20 students. So like our campus is very, very on alert, like all the time, especially like in our previous protests, they would have tons of cops on us, you know, and we would garner like a lot of students, but I would still say the ratio of cops to students was sometimes so crazy. But yeah, so I'm specifically going to speak about our second encampment, because that's the one that kind of went, I would say, viral, where a lot of people saw like exactly what brutalization was used against us. So during our second setup for our Gaza Solidarity encampment, we held the demands for, like many universities, financial divestment. The way OSU operates is it calls it a trade secret, so it's very hard to actually find the investments. But throughout the semester, we looked through several different sources that I can't really disclose. But yeah, we found some things that led to possible investments in Caterpillar, HP, Lockheed Martin, RTX, Elbit Systems, and Chevron. And yeah, so we were asking for a divestment of all OSU finances, including the endowment from those companies that perpetrate the Israeli apartheid and genocide and occupation in Palestine. Our next demand was an academic boycott, where we asked for them to cut ties with partnered Israeli institutions. They have several study abroad programs, academic programs, research collaborations, and international activities with several universities in Israel. So we were asking, for a discontinuation of those programs. And then we also asked for complete financial disclosure, where we had transparency with staff, faculty, and students regarding the university's investments and endowments, to make sure they're aligning with, ethical standards that we proclaim to have at OSU. And then the fourth was acknowledge the genocide. This is issue a public statement unequivocally condemning the ongoing genocidal campaign against Palestinian people and calling for an immediate permanent ceasefire. Like I said, we met with our university several times, and in every single one of these meetings, we listed these demands. So it's not as if they've never heard these demands. It was, we had I would say one meeting each month. So it was like 7 meetings of just these demands reiterated over and over with no response, basically. It was a lot of theatrics, I would say. They would just speak to us. And going into those meetings, we knew it wouldn't really amount to anything possibly, but, you still have to try kind of every avenue. And then our fifth one is end targeted policing, where we demanded an end to the intimidation of students engaging in peaceful protests and expression of their rights. And for basically OSU to grant amnesty and drop charges against pro-Palestine student activists. Prior to our encampment, 2 people were arrested for just protesting in front of our Board of Trustees meeting. And it was under the pretense of using noise amplification. So it's kind of similar to something someone said here. But yeah, so to speak specifically about the encampment, basically that day, our university administration, I would say in their corporate-like power, decided to escalate on a peaceful gathering of students. And it was by extreme brute force, I would say. So as I said before, we tried at 4 a.m. We were surrounded by cop cars. We came back at 5 p.m. that day, and we rallied around 600 to 700 students. And we formed a barricade. It was like a very large circle, and in the focal point of that circle, we had people setting up tents. So we started the night with 5 tents, and we had them on bodies so the police couldn't see, because we were heavily surveilled at that time. And we ended the night, I think, with 20 tents, and we just funneled it in throughout. But yeah, so it was going well. I mean, there was heavy police presence the whole time, but at 9:30 p.m. while we were praying Isha, they decided to storm and raid. And basically they turned, a public university into a militarized battleground. They positioned snipers on the top of our communal student buildings. They had drones flying around throughout. They had a helicopter that circled around us. And they employed our campus police and state troopers onto students. And they were dressed in riot gear. They were holding shields, batons, guns with rubber bullets, mace, etc. It was the whole ordeal. But yeah, so they stampeded and trampled us as we attempted to form a barricade between the police and the students that were in sujud, which is when you're kind of bent over in prayer. That's basically when they decided to come and storm. And I do want to say that, oh, am I out of time? Sorry. But yeah, okay. Yeah, basically, to kind of summarize, they basically used insane, brutal force, and we have, you know, the videos on our social media if anyone wants to see that. But basically, our biggest takeaway is that, you know, none of this amounts to anything, any of the brutalization faced in Palestine. So we will continue doing this, and whatever we face, we're overcoming it. We're going to keep fighting for divestment, and for the end of the occupation and genocide. Sorry.
Thanks, Janine. Nikki.
Aloha mai kako, everybody, and shalom. My name is Nikki. I am Filipino and Ashkenazi Jewish. I'm a PhD candidate at Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts, or unceded territory of Wampanoag Nation. I'm currently doing this from Hawaii, though, because I'm visiting family. So yet another in a long list of colonized places. I'm just gonna start with some background about Northeastern University, because kind of, as Janine was saying, it's maybe a little less known than Harvard and Columbia, or even the UC systems. Basically, the best way that I can describe Northeastern University is that it's a very STEM-oriented campus, which means like science, technology, engineering, and math is what it specializes in. And it has extremely, extremely deep ties to the American military-industrial complex. They have a really strong ROTC program, which is a pipeline for Americans to go straight into the military. They do partnerships. They named a whole amphitheater after Raytheon. And we do a lot of Department of Defense research. So it's very steeply ingrained in Northeastern University to have these ties, and I'm sure you can all imagine how much of that is tied to Israel. And another unique thing about our campus is that I would say that over half of the student body is international. So Northeastern University also exploits international labor a lot. They run the campus, the administration runs the campus on fear, though. Like the campus culture, maybe unlike as bold as Columbia or Harvard, tends to be very fear-based. People are timid to do things, especially because the Northeastern Police Department are heavily militarized, and the university uses surveillance very strongly against everyone. Workers, students, it doesn't matter. There's cameras everywhere. We experience like police brutality for sometimes the smallest things. So like NUPD does the deadly exchange. They get trained by the IDF. We have former IDF soldiers on our campus. And so that's the environment that we were kind of working with. Activism on campus is difficult, but not impossible. It exists in the neighborhood of Roxbury, which is a historically Black neighborhood that the university is gentrifying by buying up land. I'm sure lots of everybody here on this panel knows what that's like from their universities as well. And it does still have, though, a history of protests. There were protests for Palestine actually in the 60s and 70s on the Northeastern campus, and there were protests in the 80s that resulted in successful divestment from apartheid South Africa. So Northeastern may present itself as this is so unlike our campus, but really they're just obfuscating their own history for their benefits. So that's just a little bit of background about Northeastern. And going into it, I should say that I am on the bargaining committee for the Graduate Student Worker Union, GENU UAW. I'm also part of the UAW Labor for Palestine Caucus, which is a whole other can of worms outside of just academia. I'm part of our union's Palestine Liberation Caucus, and we have been obviously doing a lot of things since October of last year to try to get movement from Northeastern on BDS. But none of it was working. We did sit-ins, we did teach-ins, we did vigils, we did art installations, we did disruptions, and Northeastern is very heavy-handed in the way that it disciplines. So all of those actions, no matter how little they may have seemed like putting up flyers somewhere, resulted in heavy academic sanctions. So they gave deferred suspensions for no matter what you did, which means that anything you do, which is an effort to shut down the activism, right? Because the deferred suspension makes it so that if you do another thing after that, it's an automatic suspension from campus. And the way that Northeastern does their academic sanction hearings is also like particularly bad. You get no recourse. They just decide what they're going to do with you. So that's what our campus had been facing. The SJP chapter on our campus was also pretty timid about what we wanted to do, because in 2014 Northeastern actually shut it down for the activism that they tried to do. So there was like a lot of fear around that. So we formed this separate group, which I'm a part of, called Huskies for Palestine, which is a more radical arm of like Palestinian liberation struggle at Northeastern, where we act pretty autonomously. We don't have leaders, and we just would do like really heavy direct actions to get through the red tape of SJP, essentially. And it was us who decided to do the encampment at Northeastern after what happened at Columbia. And we knew from the beginning that we might not last even one night. We knew that Northeastern would call the cops immediately and have them on us. And so we set up on a Thursday morning, and the administration and the campus police were on us immediately. We basically had a standoff with NUPD and Boston PD for about 10 hours. Yeah, it was really intense. There were drones, there were helicopters, they brought canines, which was especially scary, I think, for a lot of people. But luckily we had, you know, I think, and this is true at a lot of campuses, it was students, it was grad students, it was alumni, it was staff, it was faculty. Like, it really was the campus community who was showing up for this, which I think really shocked the administration. I don't think they expected it from us because they're so used to us being too afraid. So when they saw that we were willing to stand off with them for 10 hours, they had no choice really but to hold off. I think a big part of it was the night before we set up our encampment, Boston Police Department had brutalized all the students at Emerson really badly. They arrested over 100 people. Like, they were washing blood out of the alleyway at Emerson. And so Northeastern was particularly apprehensive about how they were going to deal with us, especially given how much press was there. And I really think that was the only reason that they stood down. And we ended up, our goal was 24 hours at least to try to make it. We knew we might be brutalized, but we were going to try to make it for 24 hours, and we lasted 3 days. In the end, it was the Massachusetts State Police who sweeped us. Riot gear, everything, just like everybody else experienced. But I think, so in a sense, we did not achieve like divestment, but I think what we did achieve, which was really important for our campus especially, was a lot of people are much more emboldened to escalate. That's just what happens when you bring the police in like that. I think our campus community was really shocked at the way that it went down. But I will say we were really well prepared because they arrested over 100 people. They all got charged with at least trespassing, but the judge is going to drop the charges if everybody does 20 hours of community service. And we set it up so all 100 of our people will be doing community service with the United States Palestinian Rights Center. So they're going to be advocating for Palestine as part of their community service to not face charges, which is a fantastic way to circumvent the system. We only started our encampment with like 50 people, but now our Huskies for Palestine group has hundreds of Northeastern community members who want to get involved. So it really, we may not have achieved divestment right away or really any of our goals, but for the first time, the administration is looking and listening to us and seeing that we're willing to do things. And we have more engagement now than we've ever had. And I see it will be really difficult to get divestment from our university, given you know, for some university, I think it's maybe like millions of dollars that are tied to Israel, depending on what it is. But for Northeastern, I think it's much deeper connection. To get full divestment, it's more than just let's not do these campus programs. Let's divest from these random funds that you have it in. It's also deep, deep in the DoD and military industrial complex. So it'd be very difficult for us. But I think like anything we can achieve will have great impacts. And so, yeah, that's that's a rough history of that background. But I do want to say just a little bit through our union work. I know some people have mentioned like the University of California 4811 strike authorization, which is very exciting. At NYU, there's a grading strike going on. And so at Northeastern, I'm on the bargaining committee for our union. And given the way that this has really ignited people into doing BDS on our campus, we feel very strongly that we could get something within our union contract. It's something called bargaining for the common good. And so, yeah, that's where we're at. I'll stop now. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Now, Professor Rabab Abdelhadi will introduce a framework and analysis about everything. May I please, before you start, Professor Rabab, to give Noor 2 or 3 minutes to have a rest because she's been talking for 1 hour. So just okay. So, Professor Rabab, take your time.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want to also follow the tradition of my colleagues, or future colleagues, by acknowledging that San Francisco State sits on unceded indigenous stolen land of the Ramaytush Ohlone people. And we acknowledge that as we acknowledge the indigenous land of Palestine and demand and commit to ending and defeating settler colonialism in both. I also want to thank my colleagues at the Vision Center who have initiated and have brought this together. And actually, we're one of the first organizations to even raise questions about solidarity and what's going on and analyze what's happening. I also want to thank the people who brought this together, including Noor, who's translating behind the scenes, and Huda and Lean, who designed the flyer, and all of you who've come together, as well as Mr. Dardakhil. I'm going to make a few comments, not too many, because this is a topic, very close to my heart. But I wanted to say something, first of all, just like historically, about each university and very closely. Just mention one thing. Columbia University is the home university of Dr. Edward Said, but he was also confronted with death threats. People forget about that, and they forget about the fact that at Columbia University in May 68, 700 students were arrested by the police. So this is something that accelerated today, but it's just been happening. Harvard University is the home of Professor Cornel West, who was let go because of his position on Palestine, and he was denied tenure. It's also the home of Daniel Pipes, who's the founder of Middle East Forum Campus Watch, considered one of the leading Islamophobes by the Southern Poverty Law Center, who actually bragged on the 50th anniversary of Harvard activism that he was actually taking pictures of his fellow students and passing them off to the authorities. So it's very interesting to kind of like keep, I think it's really important to keep these histories together. UC Santa Cruz, not long ago, not only repressed student activism, graduate student activism, but also has waged a strong campaign when we held the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism, confronting the IHRA in October, right? It was, I think, October 13th, October 14th, and specifically confronted the ethnic studies department and the ethnic studies group that was also hosting it, denied funding. The university itself has targeted people, accused us of anti-Semitism and of terrorism, even though more than half of the organizers were actually Jewish scholars. Anti-Zionists historically have done this work, but I guess in their mind, this is not real Jews, as we all know, right? This has been going on and on and on. And also University of California, as I know that as a founding and a continuing member of California Scholars for Academic Freedom, has actually been, and the California State University and other universities in California have been actually collaborating their administrations with the state of California and with a number of Zionist groups in order to block the teaching of Palestine and criminalize it in the curriculum, including the ethnic studies model curriculum in schools, including the demanding that students take ethnic studies courses in college. All of them are very much part and parcel of it, including the legislature in California, which is headed by Scott Wiener, who's one of the leading Zionists in leading Zionist legislature from San Francisco, who also participated in our campus when our classroom was shut down on September 20th, September 23rd, 2020, in the rally that were organized by Hillel, the Jewish Community Relations Council, the university's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which funded it, our university president, and the Israeli consulate. So, you know, these things come very much together. Ohio State University has claimed to fame that it's the first university where women's studies was founded. It was the first women's studies department, but it's also reminds us of the deindustrialization and what happens when there is deindustrialization of all the places where is the industries were taking place and the transformation of the economy. And I think this is very much connected to what's happening with the universities becoming neoliberal universities. And I think, Northeastern, I think it's really very interesting that you mentioned Roxbury, which also has been a site of many uprisings against anti-Blackness, police brutality, and so on historically, and the contrast between Boston and Cambridge Square, where Harvard is, and Roxbury continues to be raised, and the whole question of quote-unquote gentrification, and so on and so forth. But also, you mentioned ROTC, and one of the achievements of the anti-Vietnam War movement was actually to ban the ROTC from campuses. And now with the neoliberalization and with the right-wing attack to take back all the gains that were made in the 60s, ROTC came back to campus. Now, quote unquote, veterans have special treatment and so on. And I think also somebody, I don't know which one of you said about the whole question of the surveillance and the cameras. I think it was Eugenie and probably spoke about that, but everybody. And I remember when I was a postdoc at New York University, they set up so many cameras and in the vicinity of the university, right post 9/11, 2001. And then after the US decided to invade Iraq, actually more than the invasion of Afghanistan, there was much more movement of that. And they said that New York University vicinity has more cameras than London during the Irish struggle. I mean, this is, it's wherever you go. And this connects to the surveillance methods that students are trying to divest against HP, Microsoft, all of them that has facial recognition, Nimbus project of Google that has facial, that actually is spying on Pegasus and so on, spying on activist organizer in Palestine, in Mexico, in other all over the world. So I think it's really important to kind of like think about that in context. The second issue I think is really important is to think about the ways in which the universities have responded. and the ways in which, and I think Nanea, you mentioned it, that the universities are basically looking about fundraising and financing and so on. And I believe that our universities are becoming corporations. I mean, they are run, the university presidents are CEOs, their title is CEOs. They are being corporations. There is something called donor-driven donations. Instead of usually universities have unconditional funding, but now so you say what you need, and then donors donate. And if they try to impose conditions, you say we don't want to. And actually, many U.S. universities have denied money from Arab wealthy places because of racism. By the way, it has nothing to do with the conditional or unconditional. But now it's donor driven, and we've seen that very overtly with Harvard. We've seen that with Columbia University of Pennsylvania, MIT, and we're seeing that with all the funders that are actually coming out of the woodworks, which was very sort of like opaque, but now it's very, very clear. It's out in the open where these donors are coming from and threatening the universities that if you, for example, we know what happened with Harvard, that if you don't reveal the names of the students who have been organizing, Columbia, the same thing, we are going to withdraw our donations. And they demanded actually students be doxxed. So they had trucks going around and putting the names of the students, enabling, exposing them to danger and threats and so on. That takes back to Edward Said, threats against him, threats against students when you put the names and the addresses. This happened to also our students at San Francisco State, and it happened also to me as well. So this stuff is going on. But there is this whole question of the repression and surveillance on one hand that's very, very overt, using the police. For example, New York City Police Department, now only yesterday we saw in the Gray Zone an article, new article, that it has a consultant who's an adjunct professor in Columbia's Institute of International Studies, whose dean is a former Israeli military, and who hosted a big event 2 months ago with Hillary Clinton and the rest of them, regurgitating the rumors and the lies against Palestinians, Orientalism, Islamophobia, and so on. And she is actually the consultant for the New York City police on counterterrorism. And she's Israeli, and she's actually justifying, legitimizing why people should be attacked and so on. And this is happening everywhere. And I think one of the things that we really need to think about is the discourse that they are propagating. They're not only saying that it's anti-Semitism. They're not only saying it's terrorism, which is actually very big charges that, I mean, people can be thrown in prison and disappear or rendition and so on. But also on top of it, there is all the claims that we always see about social movements and movements for liberation. There is always the accusation of outside agitators. And there's always the assumption which assumes that people who are fighting for their liberation do not know. They need somebody else to come and agitate them because they really don't know what's going on. And the Zionists always claim that all of us who are organizing are trying to indoctrinate people. And as an educator, and those of you who are already teaching, or those of you who are in classes, you know that you can't make students do anything they don't want to do. I mean, no matter what you try, you talk to people, you see if they would be convinced, if they wouldn't be. And this happened again and again and again. But it's actually a very convenient excuse in order to justify the targeting and the raids of people and attacking them, which is also the same Israeli discourse that it applies against the Palestinian movement historically, by the way. It's not only today, that they have always historically said that, as if people do not. No. I think the other thing that is really important, that they're doing the tactics. The tactics that they are using that are also much more accelerated than before. So we saw not with the anti-war in Vietnam took a little bit of time, right? In order to kind of get so repressive. Now it's just happening overnight, immediately. And this has to do with the fact that knowledge is cumulative. We know our knowledge is cumulative and their knowledge is cumulative, but we do know also that the balance of forces is shifts in their favor. So it's, I mean, they are the powers that be. Otherwise, we would be the ones who are passing regulations and having a better, more just, more fair, better society for all of us. But we're not in control. But I think I wanted to actually note the whole question about the sound, because this is something, and Nanea, you realize that from San Francisco State, that the university criminalized our students for having a bullhorn. And they've never been criminalized. And because the students protested the visit to campus of this very right-wing racist former mayor of occupied Jerusalem, who called for the killing of Arabs. And then the next time he was re-invited by the university president, even though we protested, human decibels over 75, or human voices over 75 decibels were banned. So it's not just only, amplified sound. I think it was one of the universities yesterday that students were not even supposed to stand on the ground. So they got on stairs. They got on stairs in order for them to speak because they were not allowed, which shows how repressive the tactics are, how McCarthyist, how much they communicate with each other, but also shows the creativity and ingenuity of people who want to resist, and they come up with all sorts of anywhere in the question of liberation. But also, I think it's really because also the collaboration is really important. So when we talk about NYPD, New York Police Department, and the collaboration, we also need to remember that there is joint training between the Israeli military, the Israeli police, the Israeli intelligence, and all the repressive forces in the US, and the ease with which university presidents and university administration are actually having to connect without any shame whatsoever, actually doing it and turning the campus to a military garrison, which is supposed to be sacred ground. And that's very problematic. And people really, really need to kind of like think about that. Why is this being allowed to happen? And what is going on, and how do we deal with that? The two more points I wanted to say, and then I want to stop, is the whole question. I think the disclosure is really, really important, that people are demanding disclosure, and that because they are always hiding all of these things, they're all euphemistic and opaque, and there is foundation even in public universities. So I think that's really important. But also, and I think the other thing that's really, really important is the ways in which people are coming together. We have over 200 campuses in the US alone. We have campuses all over the world. We have embankments all over Arab universities. We have Birzeit University started an embankment, even though nobody was actually expecting or demanding that Birzeit should do it, because they are also being graded every single now, but they're also doing it in order to be in solidarity with the people in Gaza. So people in Gaza do not feel that they are alone. So the solidarity movement has different functions. One is to let people know that you are not alone. Two is to coordinate, and this is what's happening with the student movement, is to coordinate with the people who are resisting, who are engaging in liberation, that they are the people who set up the demands. They are the people who set up the politics. And the role of the solidarity people is to work with them. It is critical engagement and reciprocity, but also listen to what the people want. Do not second guess, and do not claim that your solidarity is charity because you're feeling sorry for these people, poor Palestinians, or just a good Palestinian is a dead Palestinian, and so on. I also think that the fact that faculty has come together, faculty, and I'm faculty, I know, very slow, very, very slow, because people want to protect their jobs and they want to protect their promotions and so on, are actually coming together and supporting the students. There is faculty that already said, we're not going to go at Columbia. We're always signing pledges. We've done that when University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign fired Stephen Salaita. And there is more and more pledges going on. There is actually a pledge going around demanding that American University of Beirut revoke the honorary doctorate that they gave to Na'mat Shafiq at Columbia because of her fascism, racism, and her, so I mean, this is something you should really look at and support, because it's coming out an initiative of the students at AUB. We should support each other. And I think the connection also with labor, and understanding the connection with labor, that's the right of student workers on campuses to actually be treated like human beings, rather than this whole patronizing, infantilizing of students, that we're only there to mentor you, and you should be so grateful, and you should do it for free, and you should be starving, while big faculty, especially at elite universities, are collecting tons of money, and administrators are giving themselves raises here and there. And I think this is the whole question of all these communities coming together. And I wanted to come back to the whole question of agitators, is that it is right. We should have, yes, I have 1 minute. We should have people from the community actually coming and working with the university. It's if they're not, if the community is not supporting, and if the faculty is not supporting, and if the staff is not supporting, you're going to be targeted one by one. You're going to be like, killed one by one. So this is the question, is kind of like when we say an injury to one is an injury to all, or freedom all, and so on. It really means something collective, coming together, working with each other, building really an amazing movement for justice for all. And I think the fact that people are making it ungovernable, that there is no more business as usual when we're witnessing genocide. We're not going to allow that to happen in our lifetime. We're not going to stand by and may allow that to happen is very encouraging. And the fact that we're also, and the final point is that we're actually doing it at academic institutions where our job is produce knowledge. And our job is producing knowledge for justice, not producing knowledge for killing, not engaging in what Northeastern is doing, not engaging in what other folks are like participating in bombs, research for surveillance, for killing, and so for repression. This is actually what's our mission is. And so I'm personally very optimistic, very energized, very humbled, very honored by the work that you and all the students are doing around the country. And I'm one of the faculty who are recommitting that we're going to always be with you and support you, and also have, and I'm really glad that we have the opportunity to connect with our friends, brothers, sisters, siblings, colleagues in the Arab world, in the Palestinian movement, wherever they are, to actually hear what people are doing and how people are also feeling that we are one. We're all Palestinians in the sense that Palestine is about justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Rabab Abdelhadi. Now I would like or let me please read the questions as they send from the audience, so I wouldn't interfere. The first question is, what are the cultural, by the way, please all take notes because they are not necessary sent to a certain participant. What are the cultural and moral motives that prompted students in the United States of America to show solidarity in this way with the Palestinian people? Is this solidarity, the other question, is this solidarity continuous in time and place, or is it the result of a specific movement and will be expected? The other one is not a question. Hello, my name is Balqis Shaheen, and I'm from Palestine, Bethlehem. I actually don't have a question, but I just wanted to tell you that we are so proud of all of you and all that you've been doing. It really means a lot. We see you, we hear you, and we absolutely appreciate you. Thank you. Sending love from Palestine. Okay. As the elections are approaching, do you think that the authorities would deal with the solidarity movement more violently, or would try negotiating to avoid exacerbating the problem? Since the second question, since the current semester is almost over, do you think that the momentum of the movement will be affected? No, there are many questions. 1 second. The problem that all the questions came now, so I just need to make it like read them.
I wonder if we should start answering a couple questions and then jump into the rest.
Yes. Okay, so let's give who started first. Nania, let's give you the mic, and you can talk whatever you recall, something you want to add, you can also talk about.
And maybe each question, not everybody has to answer, you know.
Yeah, I'm fine to take a step back also, if folks have things that they want to directly respond to. I think, just this first one about cultural and moral motives that prompted students in the US, and other folks, please feel free to chime in here. But I think this moment we are reaching a critical mass of both the educational groundwork that folks like Professor Rabab have laid for us for decades, as well as, I know on my own campus, another critical mass is, surfacing within the labor movement of unions who are conscientious about Palestine. In particular, you know, the UAW, there's a call to, you know, to really take the UAW as a national organization to task for why are some locals still producing weapons that go to Israel? Why are they still producing bombs? Why are they still producing, you know, plane parts and, you know, all of that, right? So the UAW represents thousands and thousands of members across the US. And finally, you know, although the occupation has been violent from its inception, this particular moment is, words fail me, you know, and I think more and more young people, you know, even the generation younger than me, right? I'm in my 30s, but, you know, people are seeing this, and that chilling effect that Professor Rabab mentioned earlier of like targeting specific people to encourage other people to stay quiet is not working anymore because of the just extreme brutality that people can see with their own eyes, either, you know, on their phones or through certain news media and stuff. So, you know, people who are in touch with their humanity still are inclined to do something. And as soon as they begin to poke at this system and they see the sort of violent repression visited upon themselves and their fellow students and, you know, fellow workers and so on, that is a point of radicalization, because they're like, what? I thought I was just acting my conscience, and now here is this, you know, really outsized response. So I'll just, you know, say that they know that we know, and they're afraid, these institutions. And I think we've hit a nerve, and we should continue to escalate.
I raised my hand because you have a question for you. Okay, Nenia Renteria, you mentioned that Columbia University expels any student or employee who supports Palestine. In your opinion, did this lead to a decline in the solidarity movement with Palestine? You can answer.
Yeah, I will. I'll just answer very briefly, and then I will defer to my other comrades here on this call. That what I was referring to is a piece of political theater that was that brought our university president before the U.S. Congress multiple times in the past few months, during which she told her inquisitors that she would immediately fire certain professors, and in particular one postdoc who his term was already concluding, so he wasn't even fireable, in order to give the impression to the cameras that she was doing everything that she could to combat anti-Semitism, which she was equating and conflating with anti-Zionism. I think what we have seen in reality, as I said, is that increased repression on the university campus is rapidly politicizing thousands and thousands of students. So they've really, their plan has seriously backfired.
Thank you so much, Nenia. Ricky, it's your turn. You will have your three minutes. But also there is a question for you. What most motives you? Okay, what most motivates you to support Palestine with solidarity?
Yeah. Thank you. So I said a little bit about this in my bio, but if you didn't get the chance to read, I am Mexican and Puerto Rican. I study diaspora studies of the experiences of Mexican Puerto Rican people who moved to the United States. And so for those who don't know, Mexico was once much larger than it currently is. Most of from Texas to California up until the last century actually was Mexico. And so, or maybe it's been a little bit more than a century now. But the reason I say this is because I think as I've gotten older, I've realized just how much we are in the belly of the beast here. And I see myself and the liberation of my people as deeply intertwined with the liberation of the Palestinian people. To that end, the work that I do here and the work that I've done on the ground at the camps has been medic work. making sure that people are safe. And I think that there's a distinct undoing of the myth that police or militaries keep people safe in these camps. And the realization that, and I'm sure my other comrades at least have heard it so many times, it's a really important refrain in the camps. It's that we keep us safe. It's that I might not have all the skills to take care of myself completely, but together we have the skills to take care of ourselves completely. And I think that building these encampments help us remember and honestly truly believe, for folks who have not been able to believe it in the past, that building a society that exists outside of imperialism is possible. That building a Palestine that is Palestinian and that relies on the culture and the skills of the people of Palestine is possible. That beyond the cleanup of the rubble, there is something to be done there in community. And it's something that Palestinians have done time and time again since the very beginning of the occupation. And so I think that's where my solidarity comes from, is this idea that the more that we can prove that we can do it in all these small spaces, the more that we're able to scale those up and really build these liberated societies, the more that people are actually able to realize that that's not some faraway dream. That's not some idealist's idea that will never come to fruition. It's something that we actually can set down roots for and create. And we're actually creating it now. I know that sounds terribly idealistic in a time like this, but I think it's real. And I think we've all proven that it's real, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you so much. I will go with Janine, but I will also add another question. It's a general question about the violence the violence and oppression used by the police. How do you deal with this? And will you continue if this violence continue or rise or increase?
Yeah, I think this kind of connects to the moral motives question. For me as a Palestinian in the diaspora, you know, advocating in America it's not a decision. It's just something I have to do. And to be in such a privileged place and to be able to do the work that I'm doing is truly, you know, it's just beyond words. But to talk about the brutalization part, sorry, I'm thinking. Yeah, we're having a protest tomorrow for Nakba Day, and we're expecting, you know, brutalization, especially because this time we're going to be outside of campus. But that doesn't stop anyone. Even, you know, people that are standing in solidarity that have seen the violence, they're still coming out. And I think, like a lot of us have already said, it's radicalized us. So it's not, I mean, it's scary and people are scared, but you know, it's, as we said, we keep us safe and the community really follows that. So we always come out in big numbers, and I would say engagement has really increased actually.
Okay. Thank you, Janine. I will go with Max. Oh, I'm sorry, Max, you were supposed to be before, but it's fine. I know you would understand that. There's a question about how this violence used by the police affected the students who are not in solidarity with Palestine when they saw that oppression. I mean, this question is general, and you also can answer the other question. The mic is yours, Max.
Sorry, the question, I'm trying to find it. It was, how did the police violence affect those who do not stand in solidarity with Palestine?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting. am thinking of one conversation I had with someone who is not necessarily involved in political activism around Palestine. And we were talking about like kind of what was happening, like those images coming out of Colombia where you have like hordes of thousands of cops. Like, I mean, perhaps like one of the most dystopian things I've ever seen. You know, just going into the campus. And I think it certainly, you know, talking about this, I could certainly tell that it was kind of radicalizing for them, even as kind of one of these is someone who is, you know, claims to be like apolitical or whatever. And so I think this has been brought up several times today, but yeah, I think we are in a politicizing and radicalizing moment. You know, these images are coming into us constantly every day, and they are radicalizing, you know. And so I think that I fear anyone who's seeing those images is not getting radicalized and not getting politicized. I fear for them, and you know, hope that maybe one day that will not be the case. But yeah, I think for many people, and especially in our encampment, right? So like, you know, there's this core, you know, group of, you know, people that we see at all of our protests, all of our rallies, all of everything. The camp is like very different. We have those people, but we also have tons more people that, you know, I think were radicalized by, you know, the police violence they saw at UCLA, at Columbia, you know, have been radicalized over the past 7 months with the imagery coming out of Gaza. So yeah, the movement is expanding. And that's, yeah, certainly really exciting to witness. As far as the question that was directed towards me, yeah, so none of our requests or demands rather have been fulfilled. And I do want to mention one that I forgot to mention in the beginning, which is our demand that UC cut ties with Hillel, which has actually probably gotten the most news coverage out of any of our demands. It actually made it onto the like floor of Congress. The Secretary of Education was getting grilled by some Zionist Republican about, you know, whether or not he would condemn these calls to cut ties with Hillel. And I think it's important to realize what Hillel is as an institution. It quite literally in its charter specifies that it does not collaborate or support any forms of dissent against the Israeli state. It actually receives funding from the Israeli government, both directly and indirectly through Zionist organizations. It regularly hosts Zionist and anti-Palestinian speakers on campus. We were going to have one last month come to campus, but they canceled it because of some, you know, plane disruptions, so to speak. But, you know, we have been, as Jews Against White Supremacy here on campus, have been actively countering the kind of programming that Hillel has put on. You know, most recently they put on a Jewish unity walk, which was actually a Zionist rally. People were dancing and like with the Israeli flag, singing the Israeli national anthem. I mean, like quite literally as Israel was dropping bombs on Gaza. And they marketed it as a Jewish unity walk, but of course did not invite the Jewish anti-Zionist organization on campus, right? So this is not about Jewish unity, this is about Zionism. And so for these reasons, we are demanding that the UC cut its institutional relationship with Hillel, which has like a campus climate initiative that is designed to have universities like get consultation from Hillel as to how to deal with anti-Semitism. But that's really problematic because Hillel's definition of anti-Semitism obviously conflates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. So we're trying to get that relationship severed as well. And so again, another example of a demand that has not been met. And it's really interesting to see how the university responded to that demand. Our chancellor was very quick within days to release a statement saying, like, under no circumstances will we, you know, cut our relationship with Hillel, right? And, you know, we've witnessed 7 months of genocide, like live streamed to us on our phones, and our chancellor cannot make any sort of statement like that. But within days of us releasing a demand to cut ties with Hillel, you know, that prompted her to move. So it's really interesting to see how, you know, this university is so willing to defend Zionism. But I think in terms of how long we will carry on our movement if our demands are not fulfilled, I mean, all of us here are like, we are here until divestment. And so perhaps we won't be physically here in this encampment because, you know, one day they are going to raid us. It has been 2 weeks without that, but one day. And so, yeah, but I think it's less so like we will be here physically in this encampment until divestment, but rather we will be here fighting in this movement until divestment. But even past divestment, I think, you know, that, you know, certainly divestment would be a massive push, right, towards, you know, a free Palestine, but it certainly is not the ceiling in terms of what is needed or what is possible. So yeah, that's one thing the university can be assured of, is that we will be here, and there are a lot of first-year students in this encampment, in this movement, so they should get ready for that.
Thank you so much, Max. Nikki, it's
Hi. Yeah, so actually I first want to answer the cultural moral motives question. One thing that I think is a really important factor here for a lot of students in America, for some of you who may not know this, we go into like permanent life altering debt to go to college in this country. You can never escape this debt. Like you have to die. Like that's the only way that you cannot pay it back. And it's when we talk about universities becoming more corporate, we're also talking about annual increases in tuition that are tens of thousands of dollars and accumulate to hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime of paying off this debt. So I think this is a big aspect in people, I think in students especially, and I feel rightfully so, feeling entitled to demand that this money is not going towards genocide and genocide in Palestine, because this is something that we will be shackled with for the rest of our lives. And I think everybody has a right to say that they want a say in where that money is going. So that's an important aspect of it, aside from what everybody else mentioned. But I will say, as far as how does the police brutality affect people who were not vocally for Palestinian liberation or who were being silent, at least on our campus in Northeastern, something that I was surprised, but so happily so, was during that 10-hour standoff that we had on that first Thursday. As people, it was our finals week. So as students and faculty and staff were kind of like exiting their buildings after finals, they would come out to the quad where we were to witness what was going on. And then random people who had nothing to do with our organizing, like we started with just 50, just joined the circle, like ready to be brutalized with us without knowing anything. They just joined. And the circle went from 50 to like 100 people. And then people just slowly started joining in. And I would also say, because of how difficult, like how intensely Northeastern has suppressed us being able to speak about Palestine at all in any capacity on campus, even for our students who are Palestinian who lost family members aren't even allowed to grieve publicly, right? When the Northeastern community saw us being willing to do what we did, they realized that they were not alone in their feelings about what is going on. And I think it really emboldens a lot of people who maybe were, you know, right, because it's so intense, like the propaganda that like everyone is against you, this is wrong, this is anti-Semitic. But then when you see like, actually, no, I feel this is wrong and my whole community also clearly feels that this is wrong, I think it really is a big change in the tide for a lot of people. I mean, I wish they came into the movement sooner, but we'll take it, right? Like if this is what it means to achieve liberation for the Palestinian people, then we'll take it. But at least that's from what I've experienced. And then there was a question directed at me about like our international student community. And I actually think what's really interesting about this, because the question is this going to be the end of our campaign of solidarity because of like the fear from our international community about like their visas, for example, right? I don't think so at all. If anything, I think that people are emboldened. And one thing that I think Northeastern wasn't anticipating is, as we all are very aware, globally, people are for Palestine, like the people of the earth, like forget about the governments, but like the people of this planet are for, like, we're all Palestinian. And so when I think about the international community that's Northeastern, those are those people. Like we are actually for this. And so I have a lot of hope because the semester has ended, it may seem like things are dying down, but I think we're just regrouping, recalculating, re-strategizing. And when we come back in the fall, we're going to go really hard, and we're going to escalate. That's how I see it happening on campuses. But I also know in the Boston area, there are community members talking about taking it off of campuses and into the streets, into a more like Occupy Wall Street type movement to have it sustained over summer. And then with all the labor that is organizing around it as well, there's other avenues we could see it escalate over summer that I'm really hopeful for.
Thanks, Nin. Professor Rabab, please take the mic.
Just ask. There are just a few questions that are specifically in general. One question from Faisal Zakarne says asks about the statistics and so on, and I don't know if I don't think anybody has. People answered them in their intervention, but it's very difficult to get all of them, and that's why the students are demanding disclosure. So private universities is much harder to get it because they say that we're private. They even claim that academic freedom and freedom of speech does not apply to them, as if they're living on the moon. I mean, and they're always, and the thing is, like, they're always speaking about all our countries and the third world as being undemocratic. And look what they're doing. They're actually fascists. So I think it's really harder. Public universities are supposed to disclose. It's supposed to be in public figures. So you can, for example, in California, you can go to the state of California, get that. The problem is that there is this kind of quote unquote creative accounting, which is not really creative, is actually deceitful and malicious. And they try to hide things under other things. So they have the money and they have the resources and they have the staff that they can actually spend all their time to figure out how they can hide, because they know if it becomes disclosed, people are going to be so disgusted. It's not just the students. Everybody is going to say, stop talking about social justice. Stop talking that your mission is about education. Acknowledge what you are doing. So it exposes them. So they are trying not to make that possible by creating all sorts of things. However, we do have a lot of smart, I mean, we are in the business of producing knowledge, right? Forget about the business. We are in the task of producing knowledge. So students are investigating, students are running against. There are something called Freedom of Information Act. There is something in California called Public Record Act and so on. And still they will resist. I know that at my university, we've asked for public records for so many times and they say noted. And then they'll come up and they say, we don't have enough time. We don't have enough staff. And say, hire more staff. And you're already giving yourselves all these raises. Hire more people to do that, or stop doing all these wrong things. So I think it's happening. It's happening, but it's not happening everywhere. One of the things, for example, we as faculty are looking at is our pension funds, because our pension funds are being invested in Israeli bonds. And we don't want our pension funds, and nobody asked us. This is completely undemocratic. So this is something that we would like to address. The other one question was, I think, from somebody question Fatima says that how could we start it? I think we can start, but I mean, everybody has ideas to start, but I think it has to be a collective decision. If there isn't a collective decision that this is when people start and they are ready, and we have studied all the conditions, we have studied the timing, we have studied the balance of forces, we have connected with all the collaborators in the university, in the campus itself, outside of the campus, we spoke to the workers. So also we spoke, I mean, forget about the administration. We don't talk to management because their job is to repress us. So forget about them. But I'm talking about all our people to have our back. Talk about everybody, alert everyone. So it doesn't just happen and nobody can. I mean, I already know that Colombia was planning a lot of the things because you've had so many rehearsals and students were, don't you have the gas, the poisonous gas thrown at you by former soldiers in the Israeli army, and some of the students are still hospitalized, and some of the one of the women still has actually injuries and so on. So we've known that this is happening and it's escalating. So we're prepared. I mean, honestly, I don't think I'm personally was not prepared how big and how fast and how qualitatively amazing this movement will be. But it's always surprises us. Social movement, social action always surprises us. And so it's something that I think people need to work with each other, plan, test calculate all of it together and figure out what to do in order to have each other's back, because we cannot afford to have one casualty, not because it's a question, some zero-sum game, but because this is our community. We love our community. We want to care for our community. We want to protect our community. This is why we're doing it, to stop the killing in Gaza, to stop the genocide, to stop killing anywhere. So we really need to be very careful about that and figure out how do we do it. And if there are among us who become very excited and they think they're going to liberate Gaza, let's say from New York or San Francisco and so on, I'd say, maybe you can hop on a plane, go to Egypt and see if you can get into Gaza and fight over there. But if, like, just think about, we are all, there are somebody has a role to play everywhere. Okay.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for the attendees and the main participants. You really made the best and put it all well. I would like to appreciate the efforts of Noor. I think she's suffering now because of the interpretation. And thank you, everybody. I wish you the best with your advocacy work, and we wish you the best with your education, and take care of yourself. See you in another events. Assalamu alaikum.
Free Palestine.
Free
Free
Thank
Palestine.
you. Free
Shukran.
Palestine.
Free Palestine.
Palestine.